Me, it was a little less complicated, though still challenging, because I attended, remember earlier, I didn't get to share all the hats that I wear, but I attended COP in the capacity of a student as part of the World Farmers Organization gymnasium program. I got that opportunity through my volunteerism with the Jamaica Network of Rural Women Producers. So rural group looking at female farmers, female micro entrepreneurs that focusing on mostly on natural resource-based livelihoods. So this was part of an 11-month program, which culminated in COP. So they pretty much had a schedule set for us. But guess what? Like you said, I wear many hats. So I'm not just a female young farmer. I'm a podcaster. I'm a part of several other climate networks that were having things, and I also wanted to support some of my Caribbean climate colleagues. So I pretty much had to steal away in some things. And like you said, it's about scanning the schedule and realizing that almost everything seemed to be happening at the same time.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Caribbean Climate Calabash. My name is Hipolito Novello, and with me I have a special guest. Her name is Dainalyn Swaby. And Ms. Swaby, introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Big up. I'm really excited to be on another podcast. But my name is Dainalyn Swaby. I am the creator of the Global Yaadie podcast, another Caribbean-based podcast that looks at climate, culture, and sustainable living with people across the globe. Even though we do spotlight a lot of the actions that's happening in the Caribbean. And when I'm not podcasting, I am a development communication specialist. And I also dabble just a little bit into creative writing. Have several dialect pieces. I like to call myself a cultural ambassador because in my former life, I was a Miss Jamaica Festival Queen 2017 and so much more.
More than many skills and talents. That's great.
Yeah.
So what do you like about podcasting?
I'm a talker. I have the gift of gab, and it gives me an opportunity to lean into that talent. And so although I'm a capable writer, I do believe that, the words, they flow from me, and I use my energy, to my advantage. So I think for me, it's great. I love engaging with people, and know that I have this opportunity to meet people from so many walks of life, from so many countries, or even here within the Caribbean, and to learn from them through questions. I remember as a child when I was 12 years old opening a bank account, and the bank teller affirmed, how important it is. She said, "This is why you're so smart." I don't know if I'm still smart like that, but this is why you're so smart, because you love to ask questions. So I think one of the things with podcasting or being a podcaster now, obviously I won't consider myself a journalist like you, Hipolito, but one of the things is that you learn over time, or you confront over time. Are you asking the right questions? So it's not just about asking questions, it's figuring out the right questions to ask as well.
And ensuring that you get the right response, or at least that the interviewee answers your question correctly.
Yes.
So one of the topics we want to discuss on this podcast episode is our experiences at COP. We were there last year. So let me ask you this. From between 1 to 10, your experience, 10 being great experience, 1 being, worst experience.
It's so nuanced, but I am going to say a 7 because my experience is so layered. Where COP is concerned, but I'm gonna say 7 because I'm more leaning into my personal experience, more rather than the COP takeaway. So I'll say 7, and I'll dissect it with you when you're ready.
So let me guess then that one of the not so good experiences you had was the lot of walking at the venue.
Yes, but guess what? I try to convert that with the silver lining, saying that, I'm not at the gym, not getting my work. So getting the steps in was kind of important. And one of the things, even though, it was kind of not convenient when you had meetings to get to, had places to get to, but at least, COP, it's so big, so much to see, over 80,000 people, 200 side events. So you can't catch everything. So sometimes getting lost or walking extensively was how I was able to absorb some of the COP experience as well.
You know, Belize City is very, very small.
Yes.
I feel like the entire Belize City could fit in those craft goings at Expo 2020. The first 3 days, I think, I used my shoes, my working shoes, my professional shoes. And after that, I said, no way is tennis throughout the rest of Cup, because the amount of walking we have to do from zone A to zone B, and it's just crazy. And like you said, you have to go to that meeting. Then you get to figure out that AOS is at the entrance of Cup,
Oh
and then
my
the
God.
Caracom is at the way at the back, and like, yeah, I think a lot of people weren't ready for the latter walking at Cup there in
Yeah, I
Dubai.
had that equivalent experience. So my work shoes was that kidney heel. So I'm a high heel kind of girl when I want to do high heels, but then I tried to be sensible this time around and said, let me get some kidney heels, and that still didn't work. So like you, the rest of the experience, I did flats. Or what
Yeah,
girls do sometimes, we bring a change of shoes in our bag and
yeah.
then do out. But yes.
And one of the things you mentioned is that there was so many things happening at a Cup every single day.
Yes.
How
Yes.
how did you maneuver to see which meetings you're gonna attend, what information session you're gonna join in, and other
Oh my
other
God.
negotiations that you would follow? How did you do that?
All right. So for me, it was a little less complicated, though still challenging, because I attended, remember earlier, I didn't get to share all the hats that I wear, but I attended COP in the capacity of a student as part of the World Farmers Organization Gymnasium program. I got that opportunity through my volunteerism with the Jamaica Network of Rural Women Producers. So rural group looking at female farmers, female micro entrepreneurs that focusing on mostly on natural resource based livelihoods. So this was part of an 11-month program which culminated in COP. So they pretty much had a schedule set for us. But guess what? Like you said, I wear many hats. So I'm not just a female young farmer. I'm a podcaster. I'm a part of several other climate networks that were having things. And I also wanted to support some of my Caribbean climate colleagues. So I pretty much had to steal away in some things. And like you said, it's about scanning the schedule and realizing that almost everything seemed to be happening at the same time. I mean, I realized that Climate Tracker as well had a very great schedule of events where you had a breakdown daily. And I told Dizan, listen, I'm gonna come by. It just never happened because, like you said, there's so many things to do, and it is almost like a mental conflict because so many important things unfolding, but you can't be everywhere you can't be everywhere at the same time. So you just have to accept that reality and make it work and follow the conversations how best you can.
And the thing is that the conversations and the negotiations there, they keep changing. Like every hour, there's a new update. So whatever you learned the last hour, that's already stale news, old news,
Yes.
that you
Yes.
have to keep on top of a ball. It was
Yeah.
just so crazy.
Yeah, it's almost like information overload because, like we said, many things are important. It's obvious in the Caribbean. Things like sustainable agriculture, transition, to cleaner energy, loss and damage, climate justice. These are a key conversations and points that we're following, but there are other things that are unfolding as well that that because there's an intersection everywhere.
Mhm.
And like you said, so many websites, whether it's civil society, whether it's government, whether it's the COP presidency that's rolling out. So you just have to pace yourself and recognize, like, even right now, I'm still trying to look at what are some of the COP outcomes, and because everything filters. COP is one singular event, even though it spans across a day, but it's not like a culmination of what we do for climate action. Yes, it's kind of a stock take, but then it's also like outlining next steps, because what are you doing throughout the year in your respective spaces, communities, organizations, and entities, for us to be moving the needle along.
So one of the big news early on at the first few days of COP, if I think the first day, it was the establishment of the Loss and Damage Fund. And that was like, okay, good news, especially for small and developing states. But then questions arose. Okay, so how is it the fund will be operationalized? How is it that monies will go into into this fund, and how can countries like Jamaica and Belize access this money? What was your first thought when you heard the news, the president announcing that the loss and damage fund will be established?
I feel like some of the questions that you asked or just now, although it's rhetorical, those are the same things that were racing through my mind. But of course, we have to acknowledge the efforts of the activists, the leaders who have been pushing for the loss and damage fund. I was reflecting on what climate action means, and I feel like it's kind of like water beating against a rock, or water beating against something where you have to keep at it, and over time it wears down. And I feel like that announcement was a result of people keep on beating at why it is that we need to center the conversation on loss and damage. And naturally, as you mentioned, know that we've got, because we can't be too caught up in victory, so that by the time you reach it, no, you forget to say no what. So a lot of people have been asking the now what, sorry. And even like leaders like Mia Motley, who has been quite vocal on loss and damage, and also on the fact that the money that we've been spending years searching to find is really not lost. And there are ways, and there are structures and mechanisms that we can implement to make this operational. So I think for me, already, I don't want to go too much ahead, but already tongues are wagging, and the conversation has started as it relates to Cop29 in Azerbaijan, and that one of the things that this COP will emphasize, will focus on, is climate finance. So I am anticipating that with a focus on climate finance, there will be even deeper discussions on loss and damage. And as you said, how is it that we're going to divvy up the shares with it? Because now that we've gotten to the point of this rollout of the over 700 million, which is still, in the grander scheme of things, a drop in the bucket. But now that we've even got
that's some change. That's
yeah.
nothing. We need way much than that. That is ridiculous. I mean, like people. Okay, $700 million is a lot of money for any individual, but for a region
regions,
experiencing climate change effects,
right. That's true. And so small island and developing countries, not just based in the Caribbean, but you have the Pacific and you have other spaces. And now we have to think about the low income countries. And so you don't even want to, it can maybe even descend into, I don't want to say dangerous, but a lot of conflict can even ensue from that, because now, how is it that you're going to determine what's important to Belize is more important than what's important to Jamaica? And people are their spectrum. There's a spectrum as it relates to climate impacts and the focus areas and the different vulnerabilities that we're now going to have to narrow down on. You understand? So that's in and of itself it's potentially another political game that we're going to have to dance around to say, how will this work? It's 700 million out of the 420 billion that's touted that we really need for for us to accelerate and advance the scale of resilience required to combat climate change.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. The announcement that the fund is being established and monies are being pledged. Mind you, these are pledges, promises, and remember what they do to me the last time when they promised so much thing and we still not get no money after that. Right? Promises that the failed promises. And then one of the things that my minister here in Belize was explaining to me is that, okay, $700 and odd million. It's not everything free money. Loans with interest, with and all kind of things. So like it comes down, as you mentioned, to the end stage. That yes, they promise this, but then there's so much layers towards it. Because if Jamaica get more than Belize, I want to get Bex. I want to get Bex. I have to get Bex,
Yeah, no, and we understand that, because everybody, whether you want to say it's patriotic or nationalistic, COP even is about representing your reality. When we talk about climate conversations and negotiations or whatever, even if you really have a good grasp of the geopolitical issues, at the core, you have to, you're leading, you're coming here and you're standing on your reality. That's why we have activists. Your fight and your cause is based on what you experience. So as you said, it's rightly going to be a point of conflict to see how everybody is waiting for this long anticipated thing. And now when it comes to now sharing or how we can access, I think this is even where the fight for climate justice, we're going to even have to bring the lens closer to see how is it that we're going to divvy up. And we say this because it's like the world has learned nothing. We think about COVID and we've almost gone back to normal. And even now you're looking at from when the push for gender equality and integration of women in climate considerations, and initially Azerbaijan COP announced a committee without women. What? So are we really learning? So I am just using, I know maybe it's extrapolating, but I'm using one example to say, if all this fight, the talk, the change that we're pushing for, that was such a huge oversight, how can we be assured that even in operationalizing loss and damage, that the considerations that we keep saying you need to know outline, if those things will be applied when it really comes to the test?
And I get what you're saying, because loss and damage, okay, in terms of access to climate finance, are we going to prioritize vulnerable groups, indigenous people, women and children, people with diverse abilities? Do you believe that there is enough focus on that intersection when it comes maybe to climate change and gender?
Right. So it's never a black and white question. And especially even for me in the more recent years, having had experience to focus more on those communities. For one, several years ago, my God, I can't believe it's so long now. In 2019, when I was doing my thesis at Loughborough, London, on climate change response, investigation of climate youth engagement with climate change, and I had the opportunity to also, as part of my research, engage with the local deaf community in Jamaica, where they spoke about, this, whether it's intentional or inadvertent exclusion of deaf people, from the conversation, whether it's through the communication channels, language, opportunities, the forum, not being invited, not making provisions. Last year, I had the opportunity to collaborate with the Young People for Climate Action on climate change through their Climate Justice Coalition campaign. So Global Yaadie podcast was able to bring that awareness component, which I know Climate Tracker also had some collaborations with, extending the podcast into blogs. I say all of that to provide the context, this context, that having these experiences have brought me closer to the subgroups, if you want to call them that are also impacted. So just as how we say climate change is not gender neutral, and we might say us, sometimes there's no true homogeneity. There's no one, it's not en masse, because there's so many layers of how we're affected differently. So as you mentioned, the vulnerable groups, the deaf community, other people with disabilities, indigenous communities, the LGBTQ plus communities. And we also have to look at youth and women, because traditionally with climate impacts on women, women are historically marginalized and disproportionately impacted. But having had these conversations and experiences, I've just gotten to understand, I've had a deeper understanding of how much climate change affects us differently, and that vulnerable groups will always be worse affected, as climate impacts intensify. And even when, as you say, I remember now, are we placing more emphasis on these people? I want to say not as much as we should, because like I said, having the conversations and being brought closer, we are guilty of how easily it is that we don't consider them as a part of our normal. So no, and the thing is, government is going to think at a government level, and you're going to have, so maybe it's always, the civil, I'm not saying that they won't give consideration, but they probably have to think at an infrastructure level. Is it that the loss and damage fund is going to go into like strengthening disaster risk infrastructure, whether at that local government agencies, and which, though that is important, will it leave enough, or will it leave sufficient funds for now this to trickle down at the community level. For example, we have several disaster risk management agencies in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, and they're arguably undersourced. So we do understand the need for them to have the resources, to beef up and to shore up infrastructure, to shore up resources, whether it's personnel, whether it's equipment, all of those things. But at the same time, part of their mechanism may hinge also on community mobilization. How is it that we are training people in communities to be a part of the first line of response in events of natural disaster, given our vulnerability in the Caribbean? And even at that level, how is it that you're going to split up this money? Is it that you're investing in training and capacity building? What is it about the persons who are economically disadvantaged? Are we going to have resource allocation and funding reserves for these people that in the event of a natural disaster, persons who are informally employed, who is not like me or somebody else who probably, if you have a 9 to 5 and you're working remotely, you may be compensated. But you have people like my dad who still goes to work every day, and his work depends on the natural environment. So is there some sort of social protection mechanism that will be allocated from loss and damage trickling down to the community level? So I know I took us
No,
somewhere.
you did talk, and I'm getting frustrated because you are on point on what you're saying. I'm not getting frustrated because of what because you're talking,
Yeah,
because I totally agree with you, and these are the ideas, these are the considerations and factors that
yeah,
policymakers, government officials, politicians should take in consideration when they're talking about climate change. Because one of the things when I thought of across my mind when you were talking was that, okay, so we have groups of people that already are marginalized. They feel
mm,
marginalized. They are diverse, abled, and they know their capacity is limited.
yeah,
And then you can imagine how they feel that they're being ignored, that they're not part of the conversation. Um, so I totally agree with you. And I was getting frustrated because I know, I guess, in some Caribbean countries, even in Latin America as well, South America, you have some governments that would get climate finance, and then so much millions go to this consultancy, to this study, to this whatever, but there's nothing that trickles down to the regular man and woman on the street, especially those who really, really need it. Because people in government don't think what you're talking about, that your parent, your relative, your family member depends on the natural environment. That
yeah.
there should be some sort of protection for
Mm,
that. They don't take that in consideration, and it pisses me off because we have people, activists out there
yeah,
telling you this, but yet you don't do what needs to be done. What are you waiting for?
mm,
For someone to die? In Belize, communities have been washed away. What is the government doing to fight climate change?
yeah,
We have a climate office, but what exactly are you doing? And I think education is a major part of it, because you ask Belizeans downtown or whatever, um, if they know what climate change, all they know that climate they change. There's a change in the climate, but they don't understand that it affects everyone. Climate change affects everyone.
yeah. How are we the same people everywhere? How are we the same people everywhere? And excuse me, that's one piece, cut that out. How are we the same people everywhere? Because now, when you mention, if you ask Belizeans if they know what climate change is, obviously, I think we understand now where people won't be able to articulate it in this scientific way that some of us, now being on the choir, have the understanding. But you said it yourself that, but they see that the climate is changing. They see that things are happening. Things are not like what they used to be. And people have been saying that over time. So even a while ago, when you said that, what are the leaders or what is the government doing? That's why a lot of times when people ask me about my COP experience, it's gonna be nuanced, because guess what? I told some persons there that you can write the speeches for the world leaders. We know what we're gonna be saying. How long are we gonna nicely cover the reality with complex words? What we know. What are you coming to tell us? That the climate is changing and we must act now? I just scanned through a book that has been sitting on my bookshelf for some time. It's right here beside me, and I said, you know what, I'm gonna read it after this podcast, All We Can Save. And there was a section in there that was saying for 30 years we've been having these conversations about needing to act. COP28, does it mean that it has been 28 times? Like, what are we really waiting on? So, and I don't want to like feel impassioned and emptiness. I am going to close that to say, when persons ask me about the effectiveness of COP, I said one of the experiences that I leaned into and appreciated was that I was able to meet like-minded individuals. And when I say like-minded, it's not just about okay, you care about climate change. There are movements that are making change in their communities. I attended presentations. There's a young man in Jamaica who's co-founder of a seaweed farm that was at COP pushing for funding, Nicholas Key, pushing for funding for his eco venture. And they're on a mission to enhance the health of our ocean ecosystem. And what I really appreciate from this perspective is that they are not just doing it to put money in their pockets. It's also about building the capacity of fisher folk who are also impacted by the changes at sea, the sea temperatures that are depleting the fish stock. They're going further out. They're putting their lives in danger of being lost at sea. The erosion of our coastline and our coastal communities. So now with seaweed farming, that may give us an opportunity to diversify livelihoods for people who work in climate affected economies or climate affected livelihoods. And and what they're realizing is that it's not just about the capacity building and seeking the funds to do this only. It's also about the policy environment for our mariculture. So I know I went deep there, but that's just one example of saying meeting people on the ground who are serious, who are in the belly of climate action. I'm a part of a lot of women's group, well, not a lot of women's group, but girls scare. I'm talking to you right now. I should actually be at a girls scare meeting. But these women building a community of activists, building capacity, helping persons to develop their journalistic skills so that they can also amplify the work that's happening in the Caribbean, that can have a spotlight so that funders, other collaborators can also provide the resources that are needed for us to enhance resilience. So I say this to say the civil society groups, the NGOs, they are also being active, serious, and are continuing climate action. So at COP, these people are present, these people are active. So it's not so much about following the negotiations on one level. There's so many layers, and it's helping us to solidify this community to say the gaps that exist in the Caribbean, in other developing countries and small island developing states, we have people who are committed to plug them, to develop bridges or to stand in these gaps.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think the experiences, their COP, the networking, the meeting with people, as you mentioned, the like-minded people there. I appreciate those kind of people. The gentleman you spoke from Key Farms. These are people that are doing something that can affect change, And these are the small women and men that are doing what they could, the tiniest bit that they could, to help with climate change. And not only, like you mentioned, not only to help their pockets, but help other people around them.
Yes.
And this is why I get so frustrated with government and policymakers, because, gosh, you have the power, you have the political power to do these things, but why then it drag for their foot? Sometimes they're just hard-headed. That is really, really frustrating. It really, really frustrated. But yeah, meeting people at COP, doing that networking, introducing others to Belizean, just okay, you're helping with the mangroves. This is an organization you can team up with, do some stories, do some advocacy, meet with funders to see what you can do for your local community.
Yes.
So I appreciate that experience at the COP. The experience that I did not like one bit, and I'm gonna be totally honest, was of course all the walking. We never like that. I never like all the walking. What do you think I was going to say?
Yeah, the walking was the relief with the walking is that it was not as hot as Dubai was not as hot as it would have been in Jamaica. I don't know about Belize because anyhow it was
humid.
Yeah, no, if it was, I don't know. And you're right, because there was a time when I actually tried to get on a cart, and even at COP, you're reminded of your station. I wasn't a particular type of, I didn't have the type of access card or something. It was, the cards were reserved for a certain level of people. So, we had to do the walking. Yeah.
Yeah. If it was that hot and humid, I would have stayed at the media center throughout the day for the 2 weeks there.
But it's interesting that you say that, because you know what? That diminishes your experience. And not to
Mhm.
be reductionist about that, we even had to think about these things also in the context of the changing climate. Because I start to think a lot of times we say it every year, you're getting the reports about it being the hottest year on record. And even in our conversation about climate and vulnerable communities, I have two experiences. One where I remember reading a book by Diana Macaulay, Jamaican author and an environmental activist, founder, former executive director of Jamaica Environment Trust. Really one of our, I don't know if you want to say beacons, for climate and environmental advocacy. But she's a creative writer. She wrote a novel, Daylight Come, and it was like was it dystopian, you call it, or those fiction worlds where, because of climate change, the climate crisis intensified, where humans now had to work at nights. So the days became nights. So we had to work at night. So all the regular activities at night and sleep during the day. So daytime was for sleep, because if you were to go out in the sun, you would die because of the intensity. And of course, and I don't know if you can relate, and your viewers and listeners must be thinking, you realize that, and even a businessman, I listened to a lecture the other day when he said, the future of the world is in movies. Think about some of the things that are happening now, pandemic, AI,
That kind of thing.
we live them vicariously through movies, films. They were the window to the future. So I can't even dare say that, oh, this will never happen, because guess what? In my capacity as comms specialist as well, I work for a lot of climate/agriculture projects. And I remember this was 5 years ago, going to farming a work day, where there were we were doing, well, I guess it doesn't matter what we're doing, but the work days that the men, they were harvesting cassava. And they were even explaining to us that their work schedule shifted. So when probably they would start like at 7 or 8 a.m. in the morning, they are now coming off 5, 4, 5, 6 o'clock and having the workday end at 12 noon, so that they can avoid when the sun is at its hottest. And so you have to think about the cycle of life. People, so, and what it does too for some persons is potentially reduce the number of hours worked, because the sun is so hot. And though that also impacts your livelihood. So think
Yep.
about if this becomes a normal, if it becomes normal or consistent, that, so when we talk about conversation, the climate justice, and you have economically vulnerable people who will be more affected. That's just one example. So we have to adapt and embrace the capacity to think long term. And I think maybe in the Caribbean, because of how it's structured and needs are, we think short term, whether it's in the political cycle or whatever, or otherwise, we're thinking about what's immediately in front of us. Some of us, we don't have the privilege to do otherwise because of how reality is looming. But for the thinkers, for the leaders, we're really going to have to look at big picture and down the line.
It's interesting you say that. We had a fellow for the Seco 2 climate tracker, Caribbean Climate Justice Fellowship, and one of her articles dealt with that, the intensity of the sun. She spoke about with three persons that work throughout the day outside, either vending, selling fruits, vegetables, or cutting yard.
Yeah.
And they explained to her that we have to wear more protective gears now than in the past few years, because it's so hot, and then we have to consume a lot of water now because it's extremely hot. And sometimes you have to take more breaks now, or try to, as you mentioned, try finish work earlier to avoid that long
You're right.
yeah, it's crazy. And then you think about it like, wait, I didn't really think about this, how climate change affects this kind of
Yeah.
livelihoods. And then you realize, the impacts of climate change is really far reaching.
No, and I will share part of my personal experience. I remember I told you before, my dad as a
Mhm.
small farmer and he works outside and he cuts yard too. That's what he does for a living. So when I am here talking, it's not just because of my professional experience with working with climate projects. I live this reality. So I see what
Mhm.
it is when crops fail and that had affected
Mhm.
my tuition and my education. I see
Mhm.
what it is when we have conversations and he said the very same thing. Sometimes say when the sun hot, so when the sun is hot, he comes in earlier. So that means that it may take longer to finish a particular job. So maybe when there is there is a quantification to that. So when you have certain amount of jobs that you can complete within a week, maybe you're slowing down now. So instead of 5 or 6, you completed 3 because of the intensity of the sun. That's affecting the money that's coming into your household. You understand? So I'm no economist, but I mean, having being part of that reality, I fully understand how these changes, and I think this conversation, hopefully, I'm thinking, is making it clearer to people. So it's not just at the textbook level and the scientific level when we talk about how climate change affects a lot of people. Maybe don't stop to think how what is the root cause, but it all leads to moments like this.
And then, okay, so leading to moments. This is my final question to you before we close off. What are your expectations for the cup at Azerbaijan?
I haven't.
Why you make up your face? No, you make up your face. I catch that. No, why you
You
make up your
put me
face
on the
for?
you put me on the spot, and to be honest, I haven't even begun to define it. But what I would say is that I would lead from what I mentioned about the conversation about defining climate finance. And in the same way where COP would have opened up with this announcement and provision for loss and damage, I know we always spoke about the complications, the potential complications from operationalizing loss and damage. We do understand, like I just said, that it's not a simple feat. But what I would want to see in the push for climate justice and greater climate action, I want to see that inclusivity, and we want to see the intention. We can't stop. All they feel like it won't happen. Centering the conversation on the vulnerable countries like the Caribbean, people from the Caribbean, and really realizing that this differentiated responsibility that they speak for about COP, we want to see that in action, about how and that can look like a lot of things. One of the great things I saw coming out of COP28 from a Caribbean perspective is how some countries, and how like maybe saying Kitts, I remember Bahamas, maybe Antigua, I'm not sure, but some of these countries capitalize on a momentum of COP to launch some green agenda. And you do understand COP, like we said, is a big space for networking and momentum building, and not just at the country level. The Caribbean Natural Resources Institute also launched their Caribbean climate justice resilience agenda, and so capitalizing on the momentum of COP to expand partnership, to expand opportunity for resource support to drive climate action. I want to see how, remember, we come from the Caribbean, so we have to keep on using the Caribbean example. So my expectation is that we want to see how our leaders in government or civil society, NGOs and activists, whether it is in our individual layers, as I just mentioned, or as a collective, how we can definitely have to design the strategy to seek, to hunt, to get that money for the Caribbean. And I think so those are my expectations, that if the money, we have to have a stronger voice. No, not the money going share out, to say how is it how is it that we will receive it.
Yeah, we have to make sure that we get our piece of the pie, because we need it, and I don't think we could do without it in the next couple of years. So
Maybe
we have
Kelly
to. What?
sending you to
Guess what?
ask.
We are shout till we get for a piece of the pie. Try away, try away.
I feel like the Belly should send you to do the act. So send you to the
No,
line.
no, no. I broke up things. I broke up things. I broke up things. No. But thank you so much, Dainalyn Swaby, for joining us from Global Yaadie. The woman with 1,000 hats and so many responsibilities. Thank you so much. The conversation was great. We would love to have you back another time for another episode. And for our listeners and viewers, thank you so much for joining us in this episode of Caribbean Climate Calabash. And if you want to know more about Climate Tracker, go to caribbeanclimatetracker.org and make sure to subscribe. Thank you again and have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure. Big up Caribbean Calabash Podcast.